So in this video, we'll work on refining and adjusting your painting to finish it. So we have the colors and basic values and shapes down, and now we're going to continue to refine the composition, make sure the layout is where we want it, and don't be afraid to paint over things if they're not in the place that you want them. And we're still painting directly with the colors that we want, and we're going to add some more values and color balance with adding darks and lights. So more highlights and shadows to differentiate between the darks and lights. So I'm going to start with the books again and then move on to the table. So I'm going to be working in these brown tones, and the books are really kind of orangey red. So I'm going to mix up some orange first here and get a nice orange color to start with. Always needs a little more yellow than red because the red kind of takes over. So I kind of have that orange color in the middle, and then I'm going to bring it into this raw umber. And I'm always kind of wiping off my brush, and then I'm bringing the medium into it. I'm not using as much this time, but because I want to have more of a solid tone on here. So I'm testing my paint in this little test area, and it still looks a little too brown, that part. So I think I need to come up here and get more of the orange tone. Yeah. So this is kind of, I'm using a smaller brush. These are actually pretty much for watercolor, but for when I'm painting this close on a small painting, and I'm not on an easel where you usually have a longer brush and are working out from here. It's just easier for me. And I also put these little pencil things on them. If you have older hands like I do, it can just help with your grip. Refining my edges here and thinking about, you know, in the first part, in the in progress part, the first layer of the painting, more thinking about just getting everything in the right place. And now I'm thinking about getting the colors, values, shapes of everything, more of those details in here. And I'm thinking about my edges as well. There's soft edges, sharp or hard edges, and how those are going to help us represent shadows and highlights and different materials. So this is a hard edge. That's the edge of the book. I like this kind of flat, small brush because I can make it really flat and get color on the tip of it, and then just use the edge of it to really, and then this has a curve, a noticeable curve. And while this is wet, I'm going to work in some highlights and shadows. So the highlights, remember, are warm. So I'm going to keep what I have on my brush and just add a little more yellow in there. So I'm adding yellow to the color to create this highlight, and I'm mixing it in. So instead of always adding white or black, think about what the color of your object is. And we're getting the contrast between the dark and light, and the book is rounding out towards us, so it's catching the light in the part that's closest to us, right? Which is just the very spine of this book. I'm gonna get some kind of pure yellow, and this is why I make that long line of the paint, so I can grab some of this pure yellow and kind of get it into my brush. And because there's a pretty sharp highlight here, and then it sort of fades out. So I got that yellow onto my brush. I'm wiping some of it off. I'm even gonna wipe some off on my paper towel there. And then I'm gonna come back in with a kind of sort of dirty brush and just blend that in. So, because that's a sharp edge, but it's not too sharp and it fades out. So I'm gonna let that fade out. Now we have, I'm wiping my brush off, and now we have a shadow, which gets very dark here. So I'm taking this darker brown, I'm gonna just kind of pick some of it up on my brush. And so the opposite of orange on the color wheel is blue. So I have this orange brown color and I'm going to use blue, its opposite, its complement on the color wheel to make it even darker. So that brown is good for a dark color, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of blue to make it even darker. So I'm gonna take some more of this. Got too much blue on there. And this is gonna be a good shadow color. I'm gonna come pick up some of my medium, get it all mixed in there, wipe it off my brush, and I wanna get more of this brown. Let me check the color here. Well, maybe that's a good brown, blue gray. Let's see how it mixes in since my paint is still wet. So we see how dark it gets under here. So I'm going to sort of paint with the way this book is, like the shape of the book. So I'm kind of rounding my brush strokes up with the shape of the book to think about the spine of this sketchbook. So I have too much glazing liquid in there, which is making it transparent. So I'm going to come in and just grab some of this paint. You can also do this with a palette knife, but maybe I'm lazy and I just do it with the paint. I'm just gonna start bringing this down here and get more of the brown in and use more paint that doesn't have that glazing liquid in it. So let me take some more red and yellow. And then this is a really sharp angled brush, which might be helpful for me to get. Okay, so I'm mixing this in, adding more paint, less glazing liquid to really get the color I want. Now that's gone very red, so we're always adjusting, and I'm gonna add more blue in here. Always adjusting. That's gone pretty dark, but I think we can come somewhere in the middle and find the right shadow color. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I'm getting on the sides of my brush and really making sure the edge of this brush has that color in it, because I want to get this edge here that's hanging over. I wanted a lot of paint on there and to make it part of the rest of this book. So I'm coming up with these curved strokes to get the shadow of this book in here. And remember, shadows tend to run cool and highlights tend to run warm. So that's why I'm using blue to start off these shadow shapes. And I'm gonna do the edge of this here, and then I'm gonna get the edge. I'm just gonna get some blue in there. I don't know if you can see all of that. Okay, and I'm gonna take some more brown on my brush, and this got a little bit dry, so I just wanna blend this in a little better. And we'll come back at the end and get the highlights back too. Okay, I don't wanna take too long to do all of this. Same thing for the other books where I'm thinking about the color of the book and I'm always adjusting and I'm thinking this needs to be, oh, let me wash my brush. This needs to be a little more orangey. Get this over here. And you might do the thing where you mix all your colors and have them on your palette. I don't know why I don't do that. I think I just like to do it while I'm painting, but everybody has their own way of painting. So I'm gonna get an even amount of color on both sides of my brush. And I again wanna get this edge here of the book with a lot of paint on it to get that in there. This is still a little dark, so I'm gonna add more yellow in here. And a little more red. Just wanted to have a little more color vibrancy. Sometimes you'll notice, like when you're drawing and you put your wrist onto the paper and it gets dirty, you can put a piece of paper down to protect the drawing, but with painting, you can't really do that. They have these tools, which I'm gonna forget the name of it, that are like these sticks. I think it's called a mauling stick, but I might be wrong. But you can also just like hold, sometimes I just hold my wrist, and so my hand isn't touching the painting. I'm just like holding my wrist like this, and I kind of steady my wrist when I'm doing detail stuff. And so I don't have to be touching my wrist on the painting while I'm working. There's all kinds of ways that artists have come up with that. They have these sticks that have like leather or like a ball on the end, like covered in leather or other material that you can rest onto the painting without disturbing the painting. They're kind of cool. I've never used one myself, but I've seen people use them, and for detail work or smaller paintings, I think they really do help. This book has some texture on it, so I'm gonna go ahead and just make some like fun brush strokes in here. I'm gonna get some more yellow and red. I might do yellow, like an orange on either side of my brush, and just load my brush up with some yellow and red tones and kind of dabble it on. And I'm gonna get the bottom book too while I have this paint on my brush, this orangey brown, because this book is lighter too. And see, it's good when you let stuff dry and come back, you can really get a better sense of it and make your refinements and adjustments. So you spend like the first layer just getting everything in the right place, getting the general like values and color balance down. And then we're coming in and, you know, making those adjustments, cleaning up the edges. All right, now I'm going to come into so a lot of times I'll have two brushes, one for like warm and one for cool, or one for shadows and highlights when I'm doing this, so I don't have to keep cleaning my brushes. So now I'm gonna come in with my shadow. My kind of purple and blue are really great for shadows, and I'm gonna start filling in. I have my hand kind of holding my wrist here. Start filling in these shadow areas with color. Need more paint on my brush. And getting the thing with smaller brushes that can be annoying is you have to refill them a lot with paint because they don't hold as much paint, right? Because the bristles are smaller. So that's why I try to get like both sides loaded up with paint. And then you can kind of flip the brush over. So again, I'm going with the grain of the book. And I'm just gonna add some in the middle here because there's a big shadow. This is a big shadow area. And then the bottom book also has quite a bit of shadow on it. So let's get that plugged in. So I'm gonna come across and then blend it upwards. Now my paint is kind of drying already. I didn't use enough medium to keep it wet, and that's okay. I'm just gonna kind of get on what I can. And then I'm going to my super small brush that will help me mix in this shadow color in here. There we go. So I'm kind of, when it gets like that, I was calling it tacky earlier, you'll kind of feel the paint starting to dry and it's not mixing, but it's like picking up. Then you want to you can kind of lay the new paint on top of it, but it can feel like it's working against you. So this is, I'm gonna put there's like details of the cord, the string of the sketchbook here that I'm gonna do later. But I'm kind of thinking about where that is. I got my brush a little wet and I'm blending out some of this stuff that isn't in the place that I want it. Okay, I don't wanna go too far, but this here is bothering me. So I need to get it back to more red. Okay, so now that I have these reds and yellow browns mixed up, I do want to work on the table, and then we'll get into the laptop. So the table has some of the red in it here, like we talked about, but I'm gonna sort of emphasize that even more. I'm gonna get some pure red on my brush. So first I put down a little bit of the bluish shadow tone, and these are the kind of artistic license things you can take. And so I'm using some of the color that was in the book that I had mixed up for the book and then added more red to it, and I'm putting that in the shadow. And it got a little too red, but that's okay. I'm taking some glazing liquid and some of the brown, some of the raw umber, and I'm gonna mix it in here. And that's going pretty purple. So I'm gonna actually switch brushes because that had so much blue on it. And I'm gonna come in with this other brush of glazing liquid, raw umber, and I'm gonna take some of the yellow because the table has more yellow in it. So now I'm gonna mix that into my already wet paint. And get those colors in there. Let them blend in a little bit. And now I can use the color of the table. Sorry, that noise is me hitting my glasses on the tripod. I can use the color of the table and the background to also refine the edges of my books. I put blue on that one by accident. Okay, so there is a shadow on the table back here. So I'm taking a little of that yellow that I mixed and mixing it in with blue. And getting that on there. That's not looking the greatest, but I'm gonna keep going because it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just practicing getting my colors, values in where I want them to be. Okay, so I'm gonna think about the shadow underneath the laptop. I might come in with my small brush for that. So I'm using the table color, which is a reddish, yellowish brown. So I'm mixing raw umber, yellow. And we have to be careful here with the blue because it's can go green with mixing the yellow, brown, and blue in. So you can add black. I have some black over here. Here, I'll put it on where you can see on my palette. There's nothing wrong with using black. Some people don't like it, but I think for this, especially with the metal, we have the metal of the laptop that is actually black. Okay, let me check that color. That's a pretty good color. And I'm gonna add a little glazing liquid in just to make it more fluid. So I did the yellow, the color of the table, the yellow raw umber, and mixed in some black with it. And I kind of like to have my mixed colors on the palette, like this is like the pure black, and then it's mixing, like almost making a gradient into the table color, if that makes any sense. So I'm gonna first just draw the line because I'm readjusting and refining this edge of my computer with the background color. There's a string that I'm gonna ignore. And so I'm just gonna kind of keep going through here and make this cast shadow. And then I'm using while it's still wet, I'm using the grain of the table to decide how my lines are gonna be, my shadow lines. So I'm softening up this edge of this cast shadow with some glazing liquid. You could use water. And so I'm making a sharp line where it hits the computer, and then it's a soft blended edge where it blends out onto the table. So that's what I mean by deciding on your edges. What's a sharp edge? This right here is a sharp edge because the edge of the laptop is very crisp in the light here. So this is getting funky just because of all the texture with the canvas and the paint layers of many layers of paint I have in here. So that's a sharp edge. And then over here where it's blending out is a soft edge where the shadow's blending into the table. And then we have this curve, and it's going back into space at an angle for the bottom of the laptop. Another sharp edge here that blends out. And so I'm just gonna blend, kind of using these small brush strokes to blend out the softness of that shadow. Okay, this needs to be a sharp line here. I know I'm not getting the angle of this perfect, but don't worry about it. It's totally fine. We're just practicing these different techniques, learning how to add these details, adjusting the color and the value. Okay, I want to add in that highlight, and I also want to work on the laptop a little bit. I know this area needs to be worked on, and this area, but I want to just show you what might come up in your painting so that this video doesn't take hours. Okay, so I want to use this angular brush for the laptop. So I'm gonna rinse it off just in water and then wipe it off with a paper towel. Because it got really dark on there. Okay, so I have some white over here from earlier that may work. And I'm gonna mix it in a little bit with black and get this gray for the metallic color of the laptop. Oh, got some red in there. So I want to bring out the highlight of this and make it even lighter. So I'm increasing the contrast between dark and light by coming in with more white where the highlights are. So the highlights often get lost as you paint. And so like at the end, in the final stages, usually like the highlights are one of the last things you do. You kind of bring your highlights back at the end whenever they get lost. I'm just making the edge of that, and you can see there's kind of two stripes here that are delineating the edge of the laptop, and then the top of it where the keyboard is, which almost has a little blue in it too, so I'm gonna stick some blue in here, is much darker. So we're looking at the different plane. This is like the side plane of the laptop, and then the top of it has this darker gray color. So we know we're seeing the side and then the top. And this brush is helpful because it has a sharp edge to it. So we can see how dark this gets. I'm gonna come in with even more black underneath here. The book is casting a shadow onto the laptop. So I'm gonna blend this dark shadow, and while it's wet, I'll take some of the book color that hopefully hasn't dried too much up here, some of this brown red, and mix it in with this cast shadow. You could also, so I'm mixing, this is an example of mixing on the canvas. You could also mix these colors on the palette. Having a little glare here. Let me see what I'm doing. Make sure you can still see it too. I'm getting some of that red in, and I'm gonna add a little more black to it. Just letting that be really reflected. And then I'm gonna come in with just black, black, black. And this is like one of the darkest. So we're also comparing what's the darkest part of the painting and what's the lightest part of the composition. This gets pretty dark here, and obviously the screen is probably the darkest part and the cast shadows. So we're saying in comparison to this kind of shadow reflection tone here, how dark is the cast shadow? And it's darker. And then it fades out over here. I'm gonna focus on, sometimes I jump around too much, and I'm trying not to do that because it's gonna be confusing. I'm gonna focus on this, delineating this cast shadow where the book hits the laptop. So I kind of made a straight line, and now I'm gonna come in with a little bit more of that glazing medium and kind of brush it down to soften it. So it's like a little bit of a sharp line where the cast shadow is, and then it's fading out, and we see some of that red brown color. So you're really just looking and figuring out what colors are there. There's even, now that I have this red brown on here, there's even some reddish tone. Now this is the reflection from the table going into the metal of the computer. So I'm just gonna make a mark there. Okay, so now that I've gotten this so dark with that black, I'm noticing I'm making my comparisons. There's this cast shadow of the book, and this cast shadow of the laptop needs to be darker because they're about the same value of darkness. I'm gonna soften this up a little more before it dries, because I think it's a little softer. Okay, so I have this color that is the black brown, and I'm gonna keep adding more brown to it. More black to it. And I'm going to come here and darken up my cast shadow. So I kind of made a line and now I'm pulling it out to soften it. So I have a hard edge against the laptop and then a soft edge onto the table. I'm gonna get another brush because that went really dark, and I'm gonna get my yellow brown over here. That's my table color. My yellow and raw umber. I'm gonna test this color over here. It looks pretty good. And I have a lot of paint on here, and I wanna really fade this in, really blend this in. So I'm using the color of the table to blend in the shadow. And now that I'm looking at it, there's more shadow that comes in here. So I'm gonna continue that shadow shape and continue blending. So I'm just adding more paint. Don't be afraid to paint over stuff. Don't be afraid to readjust stuff. Okay, so I can keep going, but I think those are the main things I want to show you. And like we've done in other things, like I did with the table, you can use the background to refine your edges. And at the end, you want to come back in and punch up some highlights. So I'm going to take this yellow and I'm going to punch in some highlights here just to really get the contrast going, because the highlights are things that get lost. So think about where your light is coming from. Mine is coming from this direction, and get those super highlights, bring them back into your painting. And if you go overboard, no big deal. Just clean off your brush and clean it up a little bit. And I just have a wet brush now that I'm blending it in with. This canvas has a lot of texture on it already, with like physical texture with the paint. So you can always paint over that if you don't like the way it looks. And then another place I see a big highlight is here. So I'm cleaning my brush again. Let me make sure I got all that yellow off of it. And I'm gonna come in with just some pure white. And I have a lot on my brush, so I might put a little medium in with it. And I'm gonna really get that highlight in there. And then I forgot to add this reflection, which will have some, so it's like the table color mixed in. So it'll have some yellow in with the white of the, reflection of the metal. So I'm mixing kind of the yellow and the white. And remember that warm tones are going to push forward and cool tones will move backwards into shadow. And my brush, it both has water on it and medium. So it's really transparent. And I could always add more paint if I want it to be more opaque. So if there's some areas of this that are going to be really opaque, and then I can clean my brush off with water, wipe it off, and think about these edges. So I want to soften. This is a reflection on a surface, so it's very soft. So I want to soften some of these edges, and I'm just kind of like scribbling almost with my brush to soften this stuff up. Okay, and then I just want to show you if you have any details like the string that I have, which is this, I think it's going to be raw umber and white. Can't remember what I did when I practiced, but let's see what that looks like. There's a little red, more red in it. So I'm taking some raw umber, some white, and that's gonna turn pink. So fun. You just need some more raw umber. Okay, so ideally, like to paint a detail like this that kind of goes over everything, you wait till it dries. And so I would have, if we look at my practice painting, before I painted a detail like that, I would have gotten the whole table done, this knob, and you can see at the very end, I did these details in the drawer handle to get those in. I did these highlights at the very end that you can see. So I would get all that stuff done, like clear the path of where this detail of the string is gonna go before I draw it, before I paint it, and make sure this is dry, and then just kind of go for it. You know what? It's your painting. You don't have to show me the photo. If you did, you know, I love to see the photo, but it doesn't have to be exactly what the photo is. You can just kind of go for it. And it's sometimes scary to do this, but like almost freeing too, to paint something and then it kind of turns this way. To paint something like right over everything you just did. I've seen some cool artists on social media that will like smear their paintings. They'll do this like perfect portrait and then smear the whole thing, and it looks kind of satisfying. I'm gonna get a little more white for this because the white that I had squeezed on here dried. And your palette doesn't have to look as messy as mine. I have been accused of having messy palette, but this is just how it works for my brain. And if you want your palette to be, if you want to mix everything with a palette knife, that's awesome. You should do it however it works good for your brain. I end up like getting my palette like this for each layer and then kind of like cleaning it off and starting over again. But I just like to mix everything while I'm painting, and some people really like to mix everything first. So figure out what you like to do. I'm just thickening this line up, and then I'm gonna make the one for the top of it. The one that goes over, this one's kind of scary too, but I'm just gonna go for it. I know this isn't the right color, and that's okay. And then this is like a little knot at the end. So I'm gonna come in and try to get the right color. I'm gonna start with the shadow. So I'm using my raw umber and black. And since I have a lot of shadow already on there, I think I need to make it pretty dark to stand out against that. So there's a shadow on here. It is a cast shadow that is also going to help give us the shape of the book because it goes around like that. But it's like a very sharp cast shadow, so it's pretty sharp on both. It doesn't like soften. So that's another thing to think about, the edges. And then I'm going to come in with just white. Just kind of rolling my paintbrush in white and getting these highlights in here. And these highlights do sort of fade in. And gonna mix it in while this paint is still wet. It gets more narrow here. Oh, that was more paint than I wanted on there, but you know what? I'm gonna take it and I think some, you know, you might want to smooth yours out, but I think this texture that's happening with the paint under it and the texture of the canvas like is really interesting, you know, because it's not a photorealistic painting. It's not a photo, it's a painting. We're making it a painting. We're seeing the brush strokes, we're seeing the texture of the canvas. That adds interest. Okay, so for things like that, you know, just go for it. Just try it. We're here, we're learning, we're experimenting. You know, you can't go wrong. At the end, I always do this with my highlights where I'm just bringing the highlights back, thinking about just the same as I thought about like making comparisons of what's the darkest, like the darkest cast shadows and how dark, you know, thinking about a value scale, how dark the screen is. I'm also thinking about where the lightest places are, you know, here and here. Even the book can probably go lighter. I have a pretty watery brush here, and you can even add more like that. Oh, and one more thing. I'm just using water, so it's kind of mixing in with the yellow that was there. So then we have this detail. I'm gonna, if you want to, if this is like too much texture for you, you can just take a wet brush, blend it in. And what's nice, if it's dry underneath, you can kind of erase. This is a wet Q-tip. And since it's all dry underneath, I can kind of erase that. Some of the background's coming up, so it's not a perfect solution, but, and then you can come back in if the paint is wet and kind of reform those details. Refine and adjust. And then if you have details like the stitching in the book, what I did with that is with my smallest brush, you know, I add them in. I'll just do some over here. And for this kind of detail, you do want a lot of paint on there. This is just easier. And then I let it dry. And then I did do a little bit of glaze over because it was like the white looked way too white. I should have mixed a different color, but it just looked weird with the book. So I'll actually show you on this. Since that's gonna take a while to dry, I did just like a raw umber, super glazy with a lot of the glazing liquid and some water, and just did a glaze over that to kind of incorporate it into the book. I think I put a little red in there too, because that's looking, it's looking too brown. Yeah, so I just made that look like it's more a part of the book. You could also do that with the string if the string got the wrong color. So you can glaze on top of this direct painting method. Like there's no, it's not totally dry yet, but if you wanted to add more, if it was like too yellow or too white, you can always glaze a little bit on top of it. If you like the brush strokes that were there, but you need to change the color, you know, you always have that option. Let's see if this is dry enough. Yeah, so that kind of makes it look a little more aged, like it's part, it kind of does the thing that glazes do, which is unify it. So of course there's so much more detail, but I don't want this video to be much longer, but use your background to refine the edges. You're really focusing on the contrast between dark and light, your values, right? And you're focusing on color balance and color harmony between warm and cool. So, you know, also know when to stop. Like, it's okay if it doesn't feel perfectly finished. I'm not expecting perfectly finished. Maybe no painting can ever be finished, right? You could always find things to go back to. So just be at the level you're at. Know that you're learning and you're doing a great job, and just do what you can do to the best of your ability, but know when to stop. You know, you're busy, you're in school, I'm busy too. Like, let it be enough. If you learn something, that's the best. That's all you can ask for. So anything you learned on this, even if you don't love the way it turned out, it's going to be information for your next painting. So it's all good stuff. Even if it doesn't look the way you want it to look yet, it's going to help you get your next painting looking closer to how you want it to look. And then that painting will help the next painting. And don't forget to do the best part, which is like ripping off the, oh geez, ripping off the tape. That always makes it look so much better because it looks more finished. And you can see all the other layers I did under here. And if this happens, you know, you just get it off. So that always helps too, to rip off the tape, or if you didn't have tape, you don't have to do that. All right, have fun, enjoy, let me know if you need help.